EdTech Live has started a series of Moodle workshops for teachers and administrators. For more information and for other interviews on educational technology, please visit our website, edtechlive.com.
This is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to EdTech Live. Today is Thursday, October 19th, and my guest is Martin Dougiamas, the creator of the open source program Moodle. Welcome, Martin.
G'day, Steve. You said that long last name rather well.
Well, with the last name of Hargadon, I do take some care. I was going to ask you if I'd said it correctly.
Yeah, you said it great. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me along.
Thank you so much. I'm going to preface our discussion by saying that for the last 2 years I've run the open source lab at the National Educational Computing Conference, which is probably one of the world's largest educational technology shows, if not the largest. And we've typically held 2 or 3 sessions on Moodle, and they're always standing room only.
Yeah, so I've heard. We tend to have large groups of people. I've just came back from a Sydney Moodle conference on the weekend, and there was 180 or so people there, but it's just very, very avid, very active and diverse. Yeah, it's great, very exciting.
I think part of what makes that really fun for me is that Moodle, in a very unique way, is introducing people to open source software. Let's get started. I'll give you some background, or give you an opportunity to give some background about yourself, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Can you tell us a little bit about your history and the genesis of Moodle?
Sure. Look, I'm 37 now. I'm an Australian, obviously. I grew up in Central Australia. I did most of my early education on School of the Air, which is a distance education over CB radio. Also, I was pretty used to learning remotely from a young age. Eventually, I got into computer science. I wound up in a sort of support role at a university, and I was working with online learning at the university. And I was also the university webmaster and that kind of sort of stuff, and working with a lot of academics trying to use the internet. And I was using the internet quite in depth because I was a computer scientist, so I was using the internet when you could only really use it on a mainframe, and I had enough understanding of how everything worked to be right on just into all the chat rooms, all the MUDs, all the email, all the FTP, and the Gopher, and everything as it came along. So there was all this power out there, and I could see all this really interesting stuff going on, but the educators weren't really harnessing that. And the existing tools around the commercial proprietary learning management systems weren't cutting it in terms of being able to harness the obvious power of the internet for communication and information. And I figured, well, look, I can do better this. I can write something. I was always into open source, and from the beginning it was going to be an open source thing, so that people could, take advantage of all the benefits that open source provides. I went off and did degrees, a master's and a PhD in education to get more background about, the people side of the equation. I was pretty familiar with the technology, but communication and that sort of thing interested me a lot. Philosophy interested me a lot, so I wanted to get into that more. And while doing that, built Moodle, and 1.0 was released in 2002, and since then we've just been on a pretty much exponential curve, and it's been very exciting.
Let's pretend I'm somebody that doesn't know anything about Moodle. I'm a teacher who's heard good things about Moodle, and I don't know what it is. How would you describe it to me?
It's an application that runs out there on the internet. It could be on your own server or someone else's. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you deal with it through a web interface, and the web interface allows you to, as a teacher, to set up, structure and facilitate online learning amongst a group of other people. So it can be used obviously in schools and universities, but it's also used in companies and special interest groups and anywhere where you need a bunch of people communicating, collaborating, learning things from each other, whether formally or informally. It has lots of other tools for assessment. It has tools for publishing and sharing information. A lot of them are the sorts of tools you might find elsewhere on the internet, such as blogs and wikis, but they're sort of brought down to a size where they're very easy to add and use in the context of this educational situation. And that's probably the best overview I can give. That the heart of it is the course. Moodle is a course management system, slightly out of date term now, but things are based around courses, and a course is basically a sequence of activities. Moodle doesn't force that sequence, but it does say, you know, in the first week we're going to be doing this, 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 and this, and in the second week we're going to be doing this, 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 and this. And it's a fairly obvious and very simple way of describing a course that everyone understands straight away. And from that you get into all kinds of other areas with your learning, different activities, and so on.
Is it primarily for people who are doing distance learning, or could a regular classroom teacher implement Moodle effectively?
It's a good question. It really does work in both those situations. If you've got face-to-face learning, you might all be in the same lab using Moodle. Then that's called blended learning, when you're blending the online with the face-to-face. And so, along the spectrum of almost pure face-to-face to completely online, people use it all the way through that spectrum.
Is there a component to using Moodle which just helps a teacher to document their course? Do you find that teachers respond that it's a tool that they use for organizing?
Absolutely. The shape of the course and the tool for building the course, the sequence of activities and entering in resources and so on, it's exactly the same thing that the students are using to view it. So, so what you see is what you get in a way. So by creating the course in that environment, teachers are working out and learning themselves about how best to structure the material, and through the feedback they get from their class as the course goes on, they're able to very easily revise and change the direction. Maybe in the third week, the topic you had planned, everyone already knew it, everyone already knows it, and you know that you did a bit of assessment, and they already know this stuff, so why don't we just skip straight to the next one, or insert a new topic. Or likewise, they might need extra help, so stretch it out and modify your course as you go. So it very much is a tool for thinking for the teacher as well. And I think the exercise of making an online course is a very interesting one for a teacher. It can be quite reflective. Yeah.
So you've mentioned that there are components associated with a course that the teacher can make a part of that course. You said quizzes.
Yep.
What other components are available to implement within a course?
There's about 20 activities available. In the default Moodle, I think you see around 12 or so, but there are other third-party ones available. The core ones are resources, so these are anything that are just information that you want to put into the course at that point. It could be Word documents, they could be Flash animations or movies or any multimedia. There's also assignments. If you want to ask people to do something and then grade them on that thing they did or submitted, that's an assignment. There are different types of assignments, and you'll see this trend of modularity is prevalent in Moodle. We have a lot of modules, and they all have sub-modules as well. There's like different types of assignments, there's different types of quizzes, there's different types of so on. Some other core modules are, there's a chat module, the forum module is very important. It's actually the only module you can't remove, the forum module, obviously for online discussion and so on. There's quizzes, there's surveys, there's wikis for collaboratively built pages, glossary entries, collaboratively built glossaries. We have a database activity, which is a very good way to collect information from your students. So, for example, you might want them to all go out and collect digital photos about some topic, or quotes from literature, which you then combine and use as the basis for the next activity, and so on. There's too many to mention, really. There's a lot of modules.
So why is the forum module so important?
Well, it comes back to the pedagogy that was at the heart of the discussion, the original development of Moodle, which is that of social constructionism. Forums are a very good general purpose tool for asynchronous discussion, and when you're online, you can have things that are synchronous, where you're there at the same time, such as a chat, and Moodle has a chat module. But most of the good stuff happens in asynchronous mode, where people have a chance to take their time over what they say, to reflect on what they're saying, to ask questions of one another in an open space where everyone can see what everyone else is doing. And that's really at the heart of social constructionism, where people are socially constructing a reality, if you like, or a shared construction that they're all contributing to, and through the act of creating that thing, everyone's learning, and everyone's picking up a lot of cultural cues from other people about how to behave in such an environment, as well as just finding out about each other's personalities, and also the sorts of the subject matter at hand that you're actually talking about.
So if someone were not using a course management system or an e-learning system, what would be the corollary to the forum? Would it be open class time? Is it just that this provides a unique opportunity to extend kind of an open discussion between the members of the class and the course instructor?
It can be. A single course would probably have a lot of different forums for different purposes. So you would most likely have forums that were very learning focused, and they would be, in week one we're going to be discussing this particular topic as it relates to something. So the teacher lays the ground rules, and you have quite a structured discussion, a very focused discussion. The students may even be rating each other using a scale that the teacher's devised, like a peer rating, and those go into the grade book. But you might also have forums that are more free-form, like a social type forum, and that can be, just like a cafe kind of chat situation. A lot of people have a forum that's dedicated to, say, technical problems, so students can discuss, in the old days, modems and, hardware and so on. These sorts of things are slowly getting less of a problem, but you need a place where students who are new to the internet and new to technology are able to, turn to someone for help. And effectively, all the things I've just described, they're all on the Moodle's main site, which is actually made using Moodle, and that's at moodle.org. And there are forums there for people talking about all those things, but not in the context of any other subject but Moodle. They're talking about Moodle, socialising about Moodle, and so on. So, there are lots of different types of forums. We've just had a bit of a interesting event this week with our social forum on moodle.org, where a lot of people are getting very... you can see a lot of people are getting really attached to the community, and any sort of deviation. In this case, a thread was hidden for a day or so, and raised all sorts of questions about online learning and censorship and so on. And it was actually a really good thing for the community, I think, to go through that little discussion that happened this week. So I'm conscious I'm rambling.
Well, but that's part of what I like about these interviews, is it really gives people a chance to hear you talk about the program. If I'm a teacher and I want to start using Moodle, and I've just heard your description, I might feel a little overwhelmed that there's an awful lot there. How hard is it for me to start?
Luckily, not so hard. Most people will start. In the first case, you need to have Moodle installed somewhere. You need to have access to an installation of it. Moodle is part of the most web hosting packages there are so if you're just an individual teacher and you don't know anything about technology, you can get a web host account somewhere on a very cheap web host, and more than likely they'll have something called Fantastico, which lets you install Moodle with one click. So it's done. There is maintenance issues, and if you're going to be running a whole school on it, you wouldn't be doing that. There are also about 40 or so Moodle partner companies that offer hosting around the world, and they're able to cater for that. So once you have a Moodle and you're in it, you don't need to use all those tools. Most people will start with what they know, which is a little bit of content. And so they'll type up a few things, or they'll cut and paste a few things, or they'll link to some web pages that are out there on the internet. And a lot of people will feel comfortable with the notion of notes, of producing a description of the sorts of information they want people to be, engaging in that week or that day or whatever. And, in the long run, it's not something I'd encourage. We don't need to have every teacher on the planet writing their own textbook. There's plenty of information out there on the internet already. But people do feel comfortable, if they had already notes, converting them, uploading them, putting them into Moodle. And they have a sort of a structure. If they already had a course, then they can just naturally put that into Moodle as a sequence of materials, and they're comfortable. Then they might start adding some forums, maybe just one forum or two, or one every week. And hopefully and evidently people then start exploring the other activities and trying them out and adding them one by one. And that's what I was really hoping the process would be, that people new to online learning would be able to get into it quite easily, but then are able to explore the rich set of tools that are provided and start really using the power of the internet.
You've just described that I could go to most hosting sites and I would be able to install Moodle with one click through Fantastico.
Yeah.
That says to me that Moodle is pretty popular. How popular is Moodle?
It's a sad fact of open source that you never really know, because we don't sell it or license it. It gets passed around. Moodle's part of the Debian Linux distribution, for example, so you can install Moodle through Debian just by typing 3 words on the command line. Like I mentioned, the web hosts and so on. People will download Moodles and pass them around to each other, or they'll end up on CDs and handed out at conferences and so on. So I don't really know. We do have inside Moodle, once it's running, there is a registration button, and people can tell us that they are running it. And currently we have about 17,000 sites that have done that. But we also have about 3,000 downloads a day off our main download site. So, and I know a lot of people never register. So even just looking at the 17,000 that have registered, there are a lot of sites there, and they range from really large. The largest one will be Open University in the UK, which will have about 200,000 students on their Moodle site eventually. All the way down through normal university sizes and schools and colleges and primary schools and even home schools. Because Moodle's free, there's nothing stopping 2 parents running Moodle for their one student, their child. So a very large and diverse range of people using Moodle.
I looked at the stats page. Is it moodle.org/stats?
That's it, yeah.
And it shows these graphs that have this exponential growth of users. Maybe you could tell us a little bit something about open source software and how you, having started this project, not charging anything for it, can actually manage that kind of growth. And then how does someone like you make a living having created Moodle?
Yeah, well, it's a very important question, because the programmers who give away free software still need to eat, still have families, and how they need to have roofs over their children's heads and so on. So it is important to find a business model that works. Now, in open source, different projects do things different ways. Some projects will have a single sponsor or some sort of foundation or something putting a lot of money into it. Some projects will just really operate off the smell of an oily rag and have people who are finding who are being paid through other means, working other jobs and working on the software in their spare time. In Moodle, I made a very conscious decision to make it a self-sustainable project, and the way I've done that is, so there's two sides to Moodle. There's Moodle.org, which is the open source and the community side, and then there's Moodle.com, which is the commercial side. And we've built up a network of Moodle partners, which are companies who specialise in Moodle, who have a lot of experience with it, who've gone through a quite rigorous sort of quality assurance process that they are of a certain standard. And they do services, so they do things like hosting, support, consulting, installations, training, certification, and integrations, I mentioned. So, like I said, we have about 40 of these companies so far, and probably about 200 applicants still in the list, in the queue. These companies will pay a royalty generally into the Moodle Trust, which is the centre company. And the Moodle Trust uses that money to pay developers to work on the core of Moodle, to maintain the quality assurance stuff. This is all the bug fixes and the looking after orphaned modules that no one else wants to look after. That's the core team's responsibility. Integrating community contributions, that sort of thing. So that's, and we also look after the Moodle Moodle websites and keeping the community running and that sort of thing too. And that's working out quite well. I feel very sure that Moodle will continue as a sustainable thing. That there's no reason, because often a criticism levelled at open source is that it's just a bunch of hackers and there's nothing behind it. Well, in this case, that's simply not true, and that there's a lot of people who make a living from Moodle and who are committed to it as a future platform for education.
You mentioned that the Open University is in the midst of a deployment which ultimately would have 200,000 users.
Yep.
Now, they get the software for free. Do the organizations of that size end up contributing back either financially or through providing developers or code?
Absolutely. I mean, an organisation of that size needs to have very good processes in place for change management, and if you're introducing software into an organisation, you really need to make sure that everyone's comfortable with it, that there's training, that there's things are customised, things are integrated with existing systems, and there's a lot of work. I'm not sure how many people exactly they have, but it may be around 20 people or more that are pretty much full-time working on their e-learning, their online learning, which includes Moodle. They are, so simply by working with it, they're doing a lot of, they're interacting with the community in a number of ways. They're, fixing bugs and things like that. They've also stepped up and said, look, we would really like to help with maintaining one of the big modules in Moodle, which is the quiz module. So Tim Hunt, who is at the OU, is now our quiz maintainer, and so he's responsible for that module. And they just stepped up and said, we'd like to do that. And that's a terrific thing. They also directly fund some upcoming developments in Moodle, and the version that's coming out next week, Moodle 1.7, one of the headline feature in it really is the new roles implementation. And that was paid for by Open University to the Moodle Trust, and that's I'm able to pay programmers to then implement that feature, and Open University get to have it in their next version, but also everyone else does as well. And a lot of Moodle has been built that way by companies sponsoring certain features to be developed. Yeah.
Now, there are commercial e-learning programs available that have a charge associated with them. So if Open University uses Moodle and they contribute back, are they still saving substantially over the use of the commercial product?
Really, at that point, if you're talking about a total cost of ownership, I don't have any real figures. I don't really see it as being a substantial factor for an organisation of that size. That Moodle is free. What is more important to them is that that there is a community, there is an open source community specifically around that product, and that's what interests them. So I don't know if they're spending more or less than they would if they were using a commercial product, but they certainly have a lot more access to changing the code or customizing it to make it more appropriate for their own institution, and B, they're able to piggyback off the combined work of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people around the world who are also engaged in the same idea. So that's a good thing.
So that's very interesting and compelling. I interviewed, we did an interview a couple of weeks ago on OpenOffice with a school district that had chosen OpenOffice over the commercial alternatives, not because of the price, but because of the feature set.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is a pretty significant moment for, a program like OpenOffice, because it ceases to be about the cost of the program in terms of open source, but about the value brought because of it. And I hear you saying the same thing about Moodle.
Yeah.
What are other ways in which Moodle is different from, say, Blackboard or other commercial products? How unique is your philosophical approach to learning as it relates to the actual end products?
The way I describe this is that the philosophical background I have of social constructionism is a referent. It's something I refer to when I'm making decisions about how to shape the software or set up the community and so on. If you have that mindset, you can actually use a lot of different tools very effectively. If you have that particular mindset, you could just take ordinary blogs or Blackboard or any commercial learning management system and kind of make it do the sorts of things you want. There is an element of frustration often because things are not as flexible perhaps as there might be. And I experienced this when I was working at the university all those years ago, and we were using WebCT. There I was a computer scientist, and I was just trying to bend the software to do the kinds of things I wanted it to do. And I could sort of do it, but I had to do a lot of nasty hacks, and I had to have very strange HTML pasted in here and there, and it was not something that your average teacher without a computer science degree is going to be able to do. So I guess where Moodle's different is because it has that particular mindset from the beginning. Those kind of things are much easier to do. If you want to set up a collaborative learning environment, then Moodle, the shape of Moodle kind of lends itself to that, and that has all kinds of follow-on effects. Secondly, because it's open source, we have a lot of people who create new modules for it, who hack it. A lot of sites will run Moodle, their production server off CVS, and they might change a line or two here or there just to get exactly, just tweak it just to get it working exactly as they like. And that's something you just cannot do with a commercial product because the source code's locked up. So I think those are the things that kind of distinguish it. Actually, one more thing. Moodle's it's built on an open source stack, so once you have the hardware, you can have Linux, you can have MySQL or Postgres, and use Apache or any other compatible web server, uses PHP, and these are all very common open source. It's a very common open source platform, which, like I said, almost every web host supports. You don't need any special fancy hardware. You don't need to set up Java and Tomcat and these things. You can, it's very lightweight, and that means Moodle gets into all kinds of places. We have people walking around at conferences with Moodle running off a USB key, or CDs and so on, and that's really cool just to see how it gets around like that.
Now, Moodle's not the only open source e-learning program.
No.
What's that landscape like, and will there continue to be multiple projects running, do you think?
Yeah, and look, I mean, when I talk to people from other projects, it's actually all very friendly and collegial. People sort of sometimes expect there to be wars between us, but it's not the same as the commercial world where it's, just all about money and so on. I think people in open source tend to really value other people working in open source. We have a common goal. And if people choose one open source project over another, it's not a deal. It's not a big deal. I'm not out here to sell Moodle. I'm not like, that's not my major goal, to make sure Moodle spreads over the world or anything. I'm just trying to do the best job I can and make something worthwhile. And most open source people kind of feel that way, I think. So, I mean, there's a lot of other products around, probably, or roughly maybe 10 or 15 that are sort of reasonably viable still. Probably the most popular ones, apart from Moodle, there's Sakai in the US, which has a very different flavour. It's a Java-based system. It's sponsored by foundations, such as the Mellon Foundation and so on. I think they're a little bit more self-sufficient now. But it's mostly run and steered by some big-name universities, and so it has a necessarily different flavour. But it's still a very viable and very good project. There's A-Tutor, which comes out of Canada. That's another PHP project. Their main focus has been accessibility, and it's some of the problems in e-learning they've solved in a very similar way to Moodle. Some of them they've solved in a very different way, and it's quite interesting to see the differences. I don't think there's been many cases of sharing code. I can't think of any actually, really. But it's all part of the same landscape. And there's another one which is fairly popular in the space called Dougiamas. Formerly it was called Claraline, and that's out of Belgium. And also another system, has a different focus again. It's sort of a more, they're focused on sort of learning paths, and the way they structure courses is quite different. But it's all good. It's all good stuff.
Is Desire to Learn based on an open source program, or is it proprietary?
No, it's completely proprietary. I'm not sure what the technology is. It might be .NET, I think.
So the recent lawsuit filed by Blackboard against Desire to Learn.
Yeah.
How are you and others in the open source e-learning community viewing that?
Well, a lot of us were around in '99, and we remember what online learning was like in '99, and that's when this patent was filed. And we, to most of us, was our first reaction, I think, was this is completely ridiculous, because all the things in the patent were very well known at that time and existed in all kinds of different systems. None of it was really new. What was new, I guess, in different systems is how things are put together, or various levels of integration or polish, or that kind of thing. So, at first I just thought this is absurd. That was my reaction. Of course, lawsuits are serious things, and you need to be ready for it. Three of the systems I just mentioned, so Moodle, Sakai, and A-Tutor, have taken out a retained legal advice from the Software Freedom Legal Center there in the US, who are one of the people working on GPL version 3, in fact. And these are very smart people who are just helping to advise us on the correct path to take. There's been no major announcements as yet, but we're definitely being prepared. If anything was to happen, we would be ready for it. I personally don't worry at all. I don't lose any sleep over this at all. If something, say Moodle, was to face some sort of legal action, I have full confidence that I could ask for support from the many Moodle users around the world, and I would get it. And I feel confident that we could pretty much deal with anything that came along. I still feel that feeling that this is ludicrous, but we're also taking it seriously, and I think we're very ready for any kind of a patent thing. Another thing about open source people is they tend to also be quite against the idea of software patents in general. as being a fairly evil enterprise, because basically you're patenting an idea and saying no one else can have that idea, and that's you know, antithesis to open source.
That's been a pretty common theme through my interviews.
Yeah.
And many have made the exact same comments. And what I hear you saying is that were there to be some kind of a specific concern about one aspect of the program, you feel that the community could rewrite or recreate in such a way as to not face that legal challenge.
Well, no. In fact, I mean, I would rather actually attack that legal challenge head on. I just, I feel strongly enough about it that the whole concept that just to actually lay down and roll over to a software patent just seems to be copping out. And I think people need to stand up for what they believe in against this kind of stuff. So I mean, yeah, if it came down to it, we could probably rewrite something, but I hope that's the very last resort, and that we never get there. Proactively, what we have to do is document everything we do. So every bit of code we write goes into a CVS repository, is well commented. We document our specifications on a wiki. All this stuff is backed up in many places, and hopefully in 10, 20 years, if anything like this ever comes up again, we'll have prior art. We'll be able to demonstrate that certain things existed, and I think all software developers should be doing that, just as a preemptive kind of step.
So how much coding do you actually do still?
Well, not enough. I mean, I probably... well, at the moment, it depends. At the moment, we're in the final throes of getting a release going, and there's a lot of testing and a lot of work to do. I probably get about a day or so a week. Yeah. I still like coding. I still enjoy it. I'm very hands-on. I work together with many other developers now, and there's probably about 100 developers who are reasonably active and have access to Moodle, and we have a lot of discussions about everything going on all the time. So it's sort of my job to be. In the end, I'm the benevolent dictator of this project. So if it comes down to someone has to make a decision, well, that would be me. But usually we have a lot of negotiation and a lot of discussion, and things are very friendly, and we move forward all the time.
So I've interviewed both Eric Raymond and Richard Stallman.
Right.
And where do you come down on the question of calling something free software or calling it open source?
Oh dear. I'm not going to get my head. I'm not going to get my head blown off. Hopefully. Look, I do use the term open source. I use the GPL license. In the end, it's surprising. A lot of this stuff is that people will get quite heated up over the interpretation of a particular word in a license. Whereas I've found that with most people that I deal with, the end users of the software have a very, very low understanding of the differences of this stuff. And I'm finding myself explaining really basic things, yes, it's free, you don't have to pay for it, things like that. I tend not to worry. It's all good as long as the software is free. I mean, it is. I did choose the GPL because I like the idea of enforcing freedom to some extent. I do want to retain some control over the project. I'm not into. I don't want to see Moodle forking, into 1,000 different pieces, for example. I think there's benefit in keeping the community together, so that we're working together for a common goal as far as possible. And where we can't find common goals, then we insert options, as you always do in software, so that you can choose one or the other. I'm not such a hardhead that I want everyone to have the freedom to fork it at any time. I really like to promote collaboration. I guess that's the end of the product. So, I use the word open source, I guess, quite a lot.
When I interviewed Doc Searles, we talked a lot about education just in general. And one of the things that he felt was so compelling about the open source community is that it's largely self-learners who have been involved in open source software. And we talked about a shift in education and a shift towards collaborative learning and towards becoming self-learners with less of a lecture classroom style.
Yeah.
Sounds like your own personal background may fit into that a little. I'm interested in your just describing what the School of the Air was, because that's not something I'm familiar with.
Okay.
And then, do you see Moodle playing a role in changing or transforming education?
Well, okay, there's a few things there. The School of the Air is not really anything like Moodle now, but the way it used to work, for your interest, is you would get on the radio, on the CB radio, and my teacher was about 1,000 kilometres, about 600 miles away, and my class had about 4 or 5 people in it, and they were spread over a distance of about that 600 miles, and we would talk for about half an hour, and only one at a time, of course, so you have to say over after you've finished. And we'd sort of get to know each other for that brief time in the morning. The rest of the day we're working on assignments, and every 2 weeks an aeroplane would come up and land a small 6-seater Cessna, and would drop off my paperwork for the next couple of weeks. So I'd be working my way through assignments and things, and then in the afternoon there'd be another connection with the group, and we'd talk about things, and it was pretty effective. And obviously your parents have to play a big role. Your parents are there helping you and being your mentors, I guess, on the side. In Moodle, let's go to open source. In an open source development community, there's so many parallels to my view of education and to what Moodle tries to promote. It's actually, I've applied the same principles in both. In the Moodle community, for example, we have a repository, a shared repository that we work on, a shared construction of the software. We have a tracker, a bug tracker. We actually use Jira, which is a nice way to manage and track particular issues, to assign things to each other, to alert people about specific issues, and to manage the massive complexity of a program like Moodle, which is, okay, it's not Linux, but it's still got 20,000 scripts in it. So there's a reasonable high level of complexity. And so people will come into this for the first time. And the third thing, of course, is the Moodle websites. There's the discussion forums and the wikis and documentation and all that stuff. So you find people coming into this for the first time, and they're kind of a bit bamboozled by it all, and they often don't get the culture. They don't understand the flow of where things go and where you say what, and who you talk to, and so on, which is something we're trying to improve, is that initiation process. But very rapidly, people do pick it up, and they start understanding the culture of the community, and they start learning about Moodle, and they start learning about online learning. They start learning about developing through this prolonged engagement in discussion with their peers, who are us, all the other developers and teachers and people interested in Moodle, and that's the model of learning that is the future on the web. That you become part of a community of practice in an environment that's set up for that's designed to help you share information and communicate in different ways, streaming RSS here and there. And once you're part of that community of practice, you get swept up, you get involved, you get excited. You might write a piece of code and you get good feedback on it, and a lot of other people will jump on board and they'll go, that's great, but you need to fix this and you need to fix that. And so it's a constant learning process, and learning is fun. And this is not obviously Moodle. This is the internet that today is just covered in communities of practice that are doing things like that, and that's a good thing, I think.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that the actual involvement of someone in the Moodle project is very reflective of the same kind of experience you're hoping the students will have as the teachers implement Moodle.
Exactly. I mean, my classroom is the Moodle community, and it was a very deliberate decision to use Moodle for our community site, because then the participants are experiencing the community from a, quote, student, end quote, point of view. They're just a participant in something that was made for them. And they can, as they get more involved, they take more control, and they are able to contribute more, to create more, and help shape that environment. And it's very much what should be happening in a classroom as well. The teacher is not the source of information. The teacher creates an environment where the class are able to work together, are able to create projects, are able to comment and help each other and learn from each other. And this is exactly what Moodle's trying to promote.
So that's very interesting. I've drawn the distinction between FLOSS, or free and open source software, in education, and FLOSS as education, meaning that the open source community has been trying to accomplish two things, one of which is to use Linux and other open source programs just as a part of the curriculum, where proprietary software might normally be used, but also by using open source tools in programming classes to involve students in being a part of this collaborative community of software developers. What's interesting about what you've just described is it bridges that gap without having to get into programming.
Yeah.
Meaning it's an application of open source software that involves the transformation into collaborative in the normal course of whatever the context is, whether it's an English class or a history class.
Very much, exactly. And the kids today, they're just riding with it. You know, they just have no problems grasping these concepts, and you know they're all into IMing and the internet that is today. They seize the opportunity. If you give them half a chance, they'll be right in there helping to create content and building the very course that they're studying in.
So it sounds like your own personal background was non-traditional. I'm assuming that you lived in a remote area, and because of that, you needed to have this school of the air. If someone were doing that today, would they call it homeschooling?
Well, it's actually School of the Air has evolved since then. Now they have satellite dishes out there in the bush, and I lived out in the desert. It really was just red sand and spinifex. But now they have satellite dishes and internet and all kinds of all this stuff. I've been meaning to talk to them about Moodle actually. I should get around to that someday. But yeah, it's not very common that there's not many people out there in the centre of Australia. It's not that common.
So your background is not the same as a student who's grown up in a small city, going to a regular public school, sitting in a classroom, like many others. Certainly, one of the things that I think the internet and maybe the open source movement as a whole seem to have been helping facilitate is a change in our understanding of what education is, and how it takes place. And one thing that obviously students are coming with a lot of background, many of them, in internet technologies that are not being used in school. Say, for instance, blogs and wikis or social networking.
Yeah.
Does Moodle provide an opportunity for teachers to implement some of these tools like blogs and wikis in a way that the parents and the teachers can initially feel comfortable with?
Yeah.
If someone's blogging in Moodle, can that be constrained to stay within the community?
Yeah, exactly. There is a strong movement in the world today, from people who are very used to blogging, for example, who enjoy it and get into it and see the potential of it and enjoying the effect it has on them, and they there's a lot of people proposing personal learning environments, breaking apart the idea of learning groups into being basically everyone has their own blog and everyone streams to each other, and you have lots of portfolios and so on. And it's a very interesting area, and it's very useful for many types of learners. But if you talk to your average secondary school or even most universities, this will be complete anathema to them. They would be in horror, right? Because they want to have a more protected environment, and Moodle is it has very good authentication and so on, so it's kind of a protected space. You need to have accounts, you need to be enrolled, you need to be given permissions to do certain things, and the things like blogs and wikis are all very contained within Moodle, so it's a safe space. And so a lot of educators will feel comfortable with that. They go, I can use these great technologies off the web, but I can use it in my own sort of space, and we can experiment, quietly without having to worry about the effects of the wider internet. So it's very true. We are, I have a lot of plans to make Moodle interoperable with other things on the internet. For example, our blogs facility is in its next version will evolve to be able to include blogs from outside. So if maybe you're at a school where they've allowed the blogs and the blogs are going, you might say, look, I don't want to use this blog inside Moodle. I've got my own blogs out on the internet, and any posts with this particular tag will get sucked into Moodle and will appear within Moodle but you'd actually be writing it outside. That kind of thing is a lot of we're doing a lot of things like that, integrating Moodle with other outside information sources and so on.
As it currently stands, does a teacher create a blog specific to a course?
No.
Or does the blog is it a little bit wider than that?
Yeah. Well, we wrestled a lot with this. When you're integrating these things together into a package like Moodle, you can't just put a full-featured blog in there, and you can't just drop a full-featured forum, and you can't have a full-featured this and that, because PHP or WordPress, they're a single concept. I'm a blog, and so they'll expand with lots and lots and lots of features to add things like, for example, forums. You can comment on blogs, and effectively a blog is really like a forum. But in Moodle we already have forums, so in the first version of our blogs, we actually didn't have commenting on our blogs because mostly me and a bunch of other people were pretty worried that there would be confusion between the blogs and the forums. If someone blogged on a forum post, they could potentially hijack that forum post, forcing everybody to then always keep in touch with two sources of information instead of one. So we're very carefully integrating these tools into Moodle in a way that makes sense as a complete system, and that's the kind of thing we're working on, and is Moodle's very much an evolving product.
As it currently operates,
yeah.
Are there RSS feeds for blogs, and is there an easy way for one individual to see other individuals' blog postings?
Yeah.
A reader form?
Sorry, yeah, that's actually what I was getting to. Was that blogs are user-centered. So the main purpose of a blog and the distinguishing feature of a blog is that you are reflecting as an individual. You can't have a course blog as such, because a course blog is really a forum, and so we have forums for that. What you can do, though, is you can say, show me all the blogs from people in this course, and that will show you all those combined, aggregated in one view. Also, all the blogs have tags, and you can say, show me all the blogs that have this tag, or these tags. Any of those views has an RSS feed. So if you choose to have an RSS feed of all the students in your course, or a feed of all the blogs with a certain tag, or all the blogs from a certain user, you can do that. And students can create, you can stream them outside Moodle if you like, or you can stream them internally and have them appear as blocks on the side of your your own blog, for example.
I have to say I'm really impressed with the scope of what you've accomplished and with the desire that you've had to make the product accomplish something that you really believe will make a difference in people's lives.
Thank you very much. It's really is. I hope everyone out there can find the one thing they really, really want to do, the thing that just makes you jump out of bed every morning and work on something all day, because I found mine, and I'm having a blast. I'm just really enjoying doing this. So that this is, this is my life's work as far as I'm concerned.
Martin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure.